Tale of Two Cities in 1859. This was a tale, it was a work of fiction set in the context of an actual historical event that had taken place a few decades back with the French Revolution that had happened. And in the context of the French Revolution, how there were many innocent people who had been deeply hurt, and generations that were impacted, a story of people whose lives were intertwined between the cities of Paris and London. So this was a story set in, at the time, historical context. And throws, even today, it is a textbook for in many schools. And it throws very interesting paradoxes between how people identified themselves as being French, as being revolutionaries, as being innocent, as being British, as being royal, as being peasant folk, ordinary farmers, and how different classes and different identities came into conflict. And let us, this is a textbook in many colleges, many schools, and is an example of impact of conflicting identities. Today, please join me in exploring a little bit more about other kinds of identities and what kind of contrasts and conflicts that happen with these identities. But first, we will start with prayers. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Vasudevaya.
Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. Reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita, Chapter 6, Sankhya Yoga, Text 27. Prashanta Manasam Hi Yenam Prashanta Manasam Yenam Yoginam Sukham Uttamam Yoginam Sukham Uttamam Upaiti Shanta Rajasam Upaiti Shanta Rajasam Brahma-Bhutah Akalmasham Brahma-Bhutah Akalmasham Prashanta Manasam Yenam Yoginam Sukhamuttamam Upaiti Shanta Rajasam Brahma-Bhutah Akalmasham Prashanta Manasam Yenam Yoginam Sukhamuttamam Upaiti Shanta Rajasam Brahma-Bhutah Akalmasham Prashanta Manasam Yenam Yoginam Sukhamuttamam Upaiti Shanta Rajasam Brahma-Bhutah Akalmasham Prashanta Manasam Yenam Yoginam Sukhamuttamam Upaiti Shanta Rajasam Brahma-Bhutah Akalmasham Prashanta Manasam Yenam Yoginam Sukhamuttamam Upaiti Shanta Rajasam Brahma-Bhutah Akalmasham me really attains the highest happiness. By virtue of his identity with Brahman, he is liberated. His mind is peaceful. His passions are quieted, and he is freed from sin. Translation with repetition. The yogi, whose mind is fixed on me, verily attains the highest happiness. By virtue of his identity with Brahman, he is liberated. His mind is peaceful. His passions are quieted, and he is freed from sin. Purport. Brahma-Bhutah is the state of being free from material contamination and situated in the transcendental service of the Lord. Mad Bhaktim Labhate Param, Bhagavad Gita 18.54. One cannot remain in the quality of Brahman, the Absolute, until one's mind is fixed on the lotus feet of the Lord. Savai Mana Krishna Padara Vindayoho. To be always engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, or to remain in Krishna consciousness, is to be factually liberated from the mode of passion and all material contamination. Thus ends the wonderful short transcendental purport. Om Jnana Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Today yet again we have a verse with a very concise, packed purport. And as we have seen in the past, these contain the maximum depth of information, of transcendental knowledge and direction for us. So you see here how the purport is talking about Brahma-Bhutah, identity with Absolute, fixing the mind on the lotus feet of the Lord, transcendental loving service of the Lord, liberation, factual liberation from mode of passion, and how cessation of material contamination. So there are several snippets of nuggets of gold that are contained in this necklace, diamond necklace. Diamonds are studded in the gold, you can say. So let us try to understand this. But first let us try to understand the verse that we just chanted. Prashanta manasam hyenam yoginam sukham uttamam upaiti shanta rajasam brahma-bhutam akalmasham. So here again is a verse where every line there is a clear meaning. Sometimes you have words mixed between lines. Here every line has got its own meaning that is easy to understand. Prashanta manasam hyenam. So Prashanta is translated mind fixed on the lotus feet of Krishna. So this is a very, very, very noteworthy translation. And in the translation, the word-to-word translation is translated like that. In the actual translation also, it says the yogi whose mind is fixed on me. So this is a very noteworthy translation, and it's one of the reasons why Bhagavad Gita, as it is, sets itself apart from any other work, any other commentary, translation of Bhagavad Gita, because it preserves the essence of what Krishna is intending to say. You can see here the word Prashanta by itself, Shanta, Prakrishta Rupena Shanta, very one whose mind is pacified, you can say, peaceful. But actually, such a position is not possible unless a person's mind is fixed on the lotus feet of Krishna. And there has also been another verse in the before this. I don't quite remember the exact verse, where the word Prashanta has been used, and it has been used um, in context of a person who is situated in self, and that self there means the supreme self or the supreme Lord. And because of that context also, the Prashanta has been translated as mind fixed on the lotus feet of Krishna. Prashanta Manasam, so a person whose mind is so fixed in the lotus feet of Krishna. Prashanta Manasam hi enam. Yoginam Sukham Uttamam, such a yogi whose mind is fixed on the lotus feet of Krishna. What happens to such a person? He attains highest happiness. Uttamam, Sukham Uttamam. So there is a Sukham, and the Sukham is of the highest quality, and that quality is such that it surpasses modes of passion and ignorance. Uttama, that is completely surpassing the mode of ignorance. No trace of ignorance. So highest kind of happiness that is possible to obtain, that has been obtained by a person whose mind is fixed on the lotus feet of Krishna. Upayati Shanta Rajasam. So all the Shanta and Rajasam, Rajasam has Shanta Upayati. That is, the modes of passion has been pacified. Shanta is pacified. Upayati is attains. So mode of passion has been pacified, and such a state has been attained. And Brahma-Bhutam is another state. Such a person, by virtue of his identity with Brahman, liberation by identification with the Absolute. So such a yogi, he identifies with the Absolute. So we'll go deeper into this. This is not an identity that is based on the identity of, say, I am a French person, I'm a British person, I'm an Indian, or I'm a revolutionary, or I'm a farmer, or I'm just an innocent person, or I'm the son of somebody who was a revolutionary. None of that. This is liberation by identification with the Absolute, as opposed to anything that is relative. And such a person is freed from all sins. Akalmasham, completely freed from all sins. So the translation says, the yogi whose mind is fixed on me verily attains the highest happiness. By virtue of his identity with Brahman, he is liberated, his mind is peaceful, his passions are quieted, and he is freed from sin. So we see how there are different degrees of happiness. For example, somebody may find happiness in just sleeping for a long time. It may appear that everybody is waking up so early that just if you can get some little bit extra sleep in the morning, you feel so much extra. Saturday has come, Sunday has come, that means I can sleep 1 or 2 hours extra, and that is so nice. Please don't bother me on these days. Particularly on these days, I don't want to wake up early. Every day morning, I have phone calls, meetings, Zoom meetings, and just on Sunday morning, Saturday morning, I get some extra sleep, so please don't bother me. So this is one kind of happiness. But this extra sleeping happiness, it's available even for animals. There are animals, for example, the bear, when it, what is it called, burrowing in the earth, when it burrows, hibernation. When it hibernates, when it burrows into the earth in winter and it hibernates, it can go to sleep for months together. It has a lot of food before the winter sets, and once the winter sets, it burrows it creates a hole, a cave or something, and it will simply hibernate. And it can sleep very nicely without any disturbance. Not like us, that after some 10 or 12 hours maximum, you wake up and then there's a backache and eyes feel heavy, head is heavy, and you're regretting why you slept for so long. But at the time of waking up after 6 hours, you feel you want to sleep more because there is happiness, some happiness is there. But actually, if you sleep a little bit more, there is actually pain, suffering. So our body is not even designed for this kind of a tamasic happiness. It is not designed for that. Actually, our body is designed for a better quality of happiness. And there is a way to achieve that. Let us see what this verse is saying about that. But in one line, it says the yogi whose mind is fixed on Krishna, fixed on the lotus feet of Krishna, attains the highest happiness, surpassing far greater than the basal pleasure of simply sleeping, or even the pleasure obtained in the mode of passion, which is immediately followed by distress. It could be by eating very spicy, sour food or spicy food, or maybe having a heated argument with somebody. There is some rasa in that, some happiness. Oh, I had this argument, I completely defeated him in all ways. And then that is followed by so many other repercussions. So beyond all this, you get a pure happiness, which is the highest quality that is available by simply fixing the mind on the lotus feet of Krishna. And what is the quality of such a person? A person who is able to fix the mind on the lotus feet of Krishna, even before he reaches that state of fixing the mind on Krishna, there is a beginning stage of understanding his position, his identity as that of being a part and parcel of Krishna. Because if one don't have an identity with a person, one cannot relate to a person, let alone having a mind fixed on that person. So the beginning stage of having a person's mind fixed is actually to have an identity with that person, to have an identity in relationship with that person. So by virtue of identity with Brahman, he is liberated. And then his mind becomes peaceful. His passions are quieted and he becomes completely freed from sin. What is when we circumambulate Tulsi Maharani, Yani Kani cha Papani, Brahma Hatyadi Kani cha Tani Tani Pranashyanti Pradakshina Pade Pade. So simply by circumambulating Tulsi Maharani, every step that we take, Pradakshina Pade Pade, every step that we take, we are being freed from sin, as great as killing a Brahmana. A Brahmana is Brahma-Bhutah person. So a person who is already identified with the lotus feet of the Lord, if somebody kills that person, what a great sin it is. There is actually no sin greater than that. But even such an offense is excused simply by circumambulating Tulsi Maharani. Then what to speak of actually having our mind fixed on the lotus feet of Krishna? There is no question of sin being there. So it's completely freed from all kinds of sin. Brahma-Bhutam Akalmasham. So let us look at the purport. I've just divided the purport into 2 points. We'll just briefly go over that and then circle back into some of the finer aspects of these statements in the purport. So the first part that Prabhupada is saying, what is Brahma-Bhutah stage? And the second part that he's saying is, how can one remain in the Brahma-Bhutah stage? So 2 parts. So let's see what is Brahma-Bhutah stage. So Prabhupada says, Brahma-Bhutah has got 2 aspects. The first aspect is, it is a state of being free from material contamination and situated in the, and second part is being situated in the transcendental service of the Lord. So what are the 2 parts? The state of being free from material contamination, that's the first part. And the second is situated in the transcendental service of the Lord. Mad bhaktim labhate param. So this is a very important definition of Brahma-Bhutah stage, because actually Brahma-Bhutah stage can be achieved by an impersonalist also. And when an impersonalist is achieving a Brahma-Bhutah stage, that such a state achieves the first qualification of being free from material contamination, because an impersonalist can also understand that I am not matter. I am not made of this Panchabhuta. I am not my hand, leg, body. I am not my mind, and I am not my intelligence, and I am not identifying with anything that is related to the body. So I am 100% spiritual and eternal in nature. So this identity of eternity and being transcendental to matter is achievable by a person who is impersonalist, who may not recognize the personal form of the Lord. He may not even have understanding of Bhagavan, that there is a person called Bhagavan, and such a person has likes, dislikes, interactions. He can interact like any person. So this understanding that person may not have, impersonalist may not have, but still it is possible for that person to be free from material contamination. But for such a person, this Brahma-Bhutah state will not be lasting for a very long time, because the nature of the soul is to be of service. The actual nature of the soul is to render service. And because the impersonalist, being afraid of his own identity, is refusing to recognize identity, his real identity as part and parcel of Krishna, therefore he is unable to take advantage of the facility that has been provided by the Supreme Lord of rendering transcendental loving service and having a relationship with him as a person. And because he is unable to enter into this relationship, the Brahma-Bhutah position becomes short-lived and he falls down. Whereas a pure devotee, not only is he free from such material contamination, but actually he is not worried about this because he is directly situated in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. A devotee starts with the relationship with the Lord, and because he starts with the loving service of the Lord, his only goal is to please the Lord. And in this, he automatically achieves the Brahma-Bhutah state without making extraneous effort. So a person who has got loving, transcendental loving service, he is already in the Brahma-Bhutah state, such a pure devotee. And if somebody is free from material contamination and has established loving, transcendental loving service, such a person becomes eligible for pure devotional service. Mad bhaktim labhate param. So that is mentioned in Bhagavad Gita 18.54. We will briefly look at that. But let us first see how one can remain in the Brahma-Bhutah stage. So we just saw how an impersonalist is not able to remain in the Brahma-Bhutah stage, but a devotee can remain. So how can the devotee remain? Let us see. Prabhupada says, one cannot remain in the quality of Brahman, the absolute, until what? Until one's mind is fixed on the lotus feet of the Lord. And then Prabhupada quotes this famous verse, Savai Mana Krishna Padaravindayoho. To be always engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, or to remain in Krishna consciousness, is to be factually liberated from the mode of passion and all material contamination. So there is some further description of how one can remain in the Brahma-Bhutah stage by taking up to Krishna consciousness. And when a person takes up to Krishna consciousness, Prabhupada's definition of Krishna consciousness is of the highest standard. He does not dilute anything. This is not a sadhaka who is aspiring to become Krishna conscious, but rather he is talking about a person who has taken up Krishna consciousness, which means the person is Krishna conscious. And what that means is 24/7, that person is fully in Krishna consciousness. So such a person can remain in the Brahma-Bhutah stage. So to be always engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord means being in Krishna consciousness. It's always 24/7 without break. Satatam kirtayanto mam. So always engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. And that means such a person is factually liberated from the mode of passion and all material contamination. Because the moment there is a break in transcendental loving service, immediately we have lost the position of Brahma-Bhutah, or immediately we have lost the transcendental or spiritual platform, and we fall down to material platform. Because if we are not remembering Krishna, then we are remembering Maya. So a person, if he is not engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord 24/7, then such a person cannot be liberated from modes of passion and ignorance. He is certainly influenced by those modes and definitely not freed from material contamination. So this is the purport. Now, let us look at this verse that is quoted by Prabhupada, Mad Bhaktim Labhate Param. So this verse is there in Bhagavad Gita in the 18th chapter. Brahma-Bhutah Prasannatma na shochati na kankshati sama sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim labhate param. So this person who has identified with the absolute, Brahma-Bhutah, who is identified with the absolute, Prasannatma, is fully joyful. And in addition to being joyful, na shochati na kankshati. He has shochati, means lamentation. He has no lamentation. And na kankshati, absolutely no hankering for anything. Samaha sarveshu bhuteshu, means he looks at all the living entities on the same platform, on the same level. Samaha sarveshu bhuteshu. He looks at every living entity as part and parcel of Krishna. And therefore he has an equal vision towards all living entities. And such a person, mad bhaktim labhate param. He attains the highest transcendental loving service of the Supreme Lord. So the translation is, one who is thus transcendently situated at once realizes the Supreme Brahman. He never laments nor desires to have anything. He is equally disposed to every living entity. And in that state, he attains pure devotional service to me. So in this verse, I'll just read the opening paragraph of the purport in this verse. Very, very interesting and very important points that he mentions, Prabhupada mentions the purport. So the opening lines say, to the impersonalist, achieving the Brahma-Bhutah stage, becoming one with the Absolute is the last word. But for the personalist or pure devotee, one has to go still further to become engaged in pure devotional service. This means that one who is engaged in pure devotional service to the Supreme Lord is already in a state of liberation called Brahma-Bhutah, oneness with the Absolute. Without being one with the Supreme, the Absolute, one cannot render service unto him. In the Absolute conception, there is no difference between the served and the servitor. Yet, the distinction is there in a higher spiritual sense. So here, Prabhupada is referring to this one paragraph. Actually, there's one more paragraph of purport. But in the first paragraph, Prabhupada mentions the concept of oneness with Absolute 3 times. Becoming one with the Absolute, oneness with the Absolute, and without one being one with the Absolute, one cannot render service. So this oneness with the Absolute or identification with the Absolute is a very important concept, very important part of the Brahma-Bhutah state. So the fact that one can identify with the Absolute also means that one has a choice not to identify with the Absolute. So one may either identify with the Absolute or not identify with the Absolute. So firstly, what is this Absolute? So we have studied before many times that Absolute, in Bhagavatam also it is referred to as being distinct from, what is the term that is used? Absolute as distinct from, there is a term that is used exactly. I'm missing that term right now. I don't remember. Absolute truth as different, I think as distinct from matter, maybe. Could be in the first verse or in that verse of Vadanti Tattvavidas Tattvam. I think it's the first verse. Anyway, so there is there are different ways in which Absolute is defined. One of the characteristics of Absolute is it is that substance or that vastu which, or that reality that remains the same in all phases of time. So time is divided into 3 phases, past, present, and future. So that reality which exists, that truth which exists in past, in present, and in future is considered as absolute truth or absolute. For example, if you take, let's say, the beauty of a flower. Beauty of a flower may be very beautiful when it's fully bloomed, but before it is fully bloomed, it's a bud, and it does not have the beauty of a full blossomed flower. And after some days, the flower wilts, or even in a day, the flower will wilt, wither away, and it's no longer beautiful. So the beauty of a flower exists only in the present. It is not in the past, it's not in the future. So it's relative truth. Similarly, the absolute truth has another dimension, which is endurance. There is one verse in Bhagavad Gita, na sato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate satah, ubhayor api drishto antas tu anayos tattvadarshibhihi. So the tattvadarshibhihi have studied the both the absolute truth and matter, and they have decided, or they have established, that of that which is absolute truth or eternal truth, there is no cessation. It doesn't stop being into existence in future. And that which is relative or matter, it has no endurance. It ceases at some point. It comes into existence, it stays for some time, and then it goes away after some time. So absolute truth is that which has got endurance. It is that which exists in all the 3 dimensions. and it is that which is not relative. For example, my existence here is a truth. I exist, I'm sitting in front of you, I'm speaking, you're also sitting, you're listening, your existence is also truth. But my existence is relative to my parents' existence. If my parents had not existed, then I would not be sitting here in this form in front of you, speaking. Similarly, if your parents had not existed, you would not be sitting here in this form, listening, hearing. So our existence, your existence and my existence in this form is relative truth. It is conditional to another truth being existing. So such a relative truth is distinct from absolute truth, which has got no other cause. It is not dependent on anything else. And it is true regardless of any other truth. So that is called absolute. So the identifying that there is such an absolute truth, and actually I am part of that eternal absolute truth. This identity is very different from the kind of identity that we typically have, and we carry out all our actions in our day-to-day life as a father, as a child, as a son, as a daughter, as a national, as a Indian or an American national, or as a Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian. All these identities that are there, they are all relative identities. They are contingent upon certain other factors. But the identity of being a part and parcel of the absolute, that is not relative. That is absolute identity. So these are the two identities, and they have understanding or acting along these two identities produces very, very different results. So this verse, what it is saying and what it is impelling us to contemplate on, to deliberate upon is, what identity are we truly acting on? What is the predominant identity that is occupying our consciousness with which we conduct our day-to-day life? And further, as we deliberate on this, there are three stages that Prabhupada has described as being there for a person who is in this absolute identity or Brahma-Bhutah stage. The first stage is the joyful stage, because such a person is completely free from any anxiety. Why is free from anxiety? Because when a person is working for sense gratification, he is working on the basis that I am acting for some result. And if I don't act properly, the result will not come. And therefore, all the actions are guided by an anxiety for the result. And the reality is that result is not always in our hands. There are so many factors guiding that. And we all know that. We know that the result is not in our hand. And yet we believe that our own actions are going to bring about this result. And therefore, there's an irreconcilable anxiety which cannot go away. Because by the very nature of how the universe is designed, the results are not in our hands. And yet we are acting in the belief that results are in our hand. And this fundamental gap of our understanding causes a constant anxiety that doesn't go away. But a person who is identifying with the absolute, he realizes that actually I am not acting for my pleasure, but I'm acting for the pleasure of the absolute. I'm acting for the purpose of the whole. A part acts for the purpose of a whole. A screw in a machine is acting for the benefit of the machine to work, not for its own benefit. Similarly, a person who is in the identity with the absolute is acting for the pleasure of the absolute. And because he has no specific result to look for, because he knows that it is the absolute that actually determines the result, and he is not particularly attached to the result himself, because he's not looking for it for himself. And because he's not looking for the result for himself, rather he's looking for the result to belong to the absolute, therefore he's completely freed from anxiety. Because of this lack of anxiety, he is in a joyful state. He has nothing to worry about. Just like a cashier in a bank who is working for the benefit of the bank, he identifies himself as a bank employee. And one day somebody may come and deposit $100,000. Another day somebody may come and deposit $1. Whether he's depositing $1 or $100,000, that's not his money. His job is to take it and put it in the safe. That's his job. So as long as he's doing his job, he is joyful. Similarly, a person who is identifying with the absolute, no matter what the result of his effort, he is doing it with the consciousness of pleasing the absolute, and therefore he is joyful. The second stage is the stage of no hankering or lamentation. Because a devotee in Krishna consciousness he has nothing to lament or desire. He does not lament for any material loss or gain because he is full in the service of the Lord. And now I'm just reading this from the purport of Brahma-Bhutah Prasannatma verse, these lines. He has no desire for material enjoyment because he knows that every living entity is fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord and therefore eternally a servant. So he has no desire for himself because his only desire is to please the Lord. He has no desire for himself, and nor does he lament on losing anything because he never wanted anything in the first place. And therefore, the second stage is such a person has no lamentation or no desire. And then the third stage is that he sees everyone, all the other living entities with equal vision on an equal platform. How is that? Now again, I'm reading from the purport of this verse. He does not see in the material world someone as higher and someone as lower. Higher and lower positions are ephemeral. Ephemeral means temporary. And a devotee has nothing to do with ephemeral appearances or disappearances. For him, stone and gold are of equal value. This is the Brahma-Bhutah stage, and this stage is attained very easily by the pure devotee. In that stage of existence, the idea of becoming one with the Supreme Brahman and annihilating one's individuality becomes hellish. And the idea of attaining the heavenly kingdom becomes phantasmagoria. And the senses are like broken serpent's teeth. As there is no fear of a serpent with broken teeth, so there is no fear from the senses when they are automatically controlled. The world is miserable for the materially infected person, but for a devotee, the entire world is as good as Vaikuntha or the spiritual sky. The highest personality in this material universe is no more significant than an ant for a devotee. Such a stage can be achieved by the mercy of Lord Chaitanya, who preached pure devotional service in this age. So, for a devotee, every living entity, whether that person may be the president of America or he may be the president of the entire universe, is no different than an ant because he sees all the living entities on the same absolute platform and in identity with the absolute as being part of the absolute. So these are the three stages of Brahma-Bhutah that have been described by Prabhupada in the purport, and they are also mentioned in the verse Brahma-Bhutah Prasannatma na shochati na kankshati samasarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim labate param. Now, these three stages, they are all based on a platform of spiritual identity, as we have discussed, right? Identity with the absolute. So now, let us look at what is leading to this, leading us towards reaching that platform of the absolute. There are two questions that I would like to present to you that were asked by a very exalted person to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The first question is, Ke Ami? And the second question is, Kene Amaya Jare Tapatraya? So the first question, Ke Ami, means, who am I? And the second question, Kene Amaya Jare Tapatraya, means, why am I suffering from these threefold miseries? So these questions were put forward by Sanatana Goswami to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Now, these may appear to be very ordinary questions to us. It may be that, okay, he's going to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he's asking some basic questions out of humility. Okay, who am I? Why am I suffering? But actually, these are very, very profound questions. And until we reach a stage where we have these real questions in our heart, we would not even begin to make our journey towards reaching the Brahma-Bhutah stage. Just to give you a context put this in context. If you might have heard of many great scientists. One such very popular, very well-known scientist who passed away perhaps maybe 7-8 years back, or maybe less than 10 years back, was a personality by the name Stephen Hawking. And Stephen Hawking was not only a great scientist, but a physicist, a mathematician. He was also a person who has popularized science and brought some difficult advanced concept in our everyday language of people in general. And he has written many books. One of the books he has written is called A Brief History of Time. In this book, and it's a very popular book, Brief History of Time is read by any intellectually minded person, or even popular, because it's in popular science, it is a bestseller. I think it was a New York Times bestseller, one of the bestseller lists. And certainly world over it is sold. Many, many copies have been sold. Brief History of Time. In that, he talks about the origin of the universe, expansion, and using some mathematical formula. It's not a very big book. It's a thin book, maybe 150 pages or so. So after this entire book is written, the last page, the last chapter, which is titled Conclusion, in the last page, in the last paragraph, Stephen Hawking writes, describing the concept of the theory of everything. So there's a concept of theory of everything, which previously was called the grand unification theory, bringing together several fundamental forces of the forces of gravitation, the forces of electromagnetism, the strong nuclear forces, the weak nuclear forces. So all these forces, which are fundamental forces, the physicists have been looking for a long time on what if there was a single cause, a single force behind all these forces that could explain why this whole cause, or how this whole cosmic manifestation has come about with a single force or a single explanation behind all of it. That was called previously the grand unification theory, and now it is called the theory of everything. So Stephen Hawking comments on this theory of everything in his last paragraph of this book. And he says that if such a theory is in fact found, then such a theory should be such that it should be very easy to understand. It should be very elegant. In time, given time, people should be able to understand it. Anyone, not just advanced physicists or mathematicians, but ordinary people should be able to understand it. And if we can arrive at such a theory that can explain why this cosmic manifestation exists, then he says we can actually explain the most vexing problem behind the human existence and the universal existence. And not only that, but we can actually understand the mind of God. This is what he says. So the mind of God, why do we exist? Why does the universe exist? So these are the most pressing problems that are facing scientists for decades, not just 1 or 2 years. These are the brilliant, most brilliant minds, the most brilliant scientists. They are struggling with these questions. And very, very, very interestingly, our ancient Indian scriptures, the Vedic literature, address these very questions. And particularly, the essence of all the Vedic knowledge is contained in the literature called Vedanta. And the summary of Vedanta is contained in Bhagavad Gita, and elaborate commentary of Vedanta is in Srimad Bhagavatam. So both Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam deal with these most pressing questions, most important, vexing philosophical questions that face our humanity. And we should understand what these questions are, and we should deliberate upon them. And when we try to find answers and we start to inquire, at that point, our journey back home, back to Godhead begins. Ke ami, kene amai jare tapatraya. The first question is, who am I? The second question really is, why do I exist? Because why do I exist means, why do I exist in this body? Because this body is constantly being bombarded with difficulties, distress, suffering. And so why this suffering really is a question of, why do I exist? Why does the universe around me exist the way it exists? What's the purpose behind all this? So this is the second question. And these are the most important questions that we should ask ourselves. So asking these questions begins our philosophical inquiry, begins us from moving from a platform of identifying ourselves with simply with what we see around us, to a slightly higher platform, abstracting ourselves out from that and really searching for our real identity. And then we can, so unless we have this inquiry coming from within the heart, from within the core of the heart, we'll never be able to find the answer. No matter how often we try to read Bhagavad Gita or we hear from authorities, because we are not having the fundamental curiosity within us. So we have to develop that curiosity within us. So there is another verse in Chaitanya Charitamrita where Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is instructing Sanatana Goswami in answer to his question of Kayami. So Sanatana Goswami is asking, and then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is answering. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, very, very quickly, within just a few verses, he immediately comes to the point. And he says very simply, Jivera Swarupahaya Krishnera Nityadas. Krishnera Tatastha Shakti Abheda Abheda Prakasha. Suryamsha Kirtana Yaiche Agni Jwala Chaya. Swabhavika Krishnera Tina Prakara Shakti Hai. It is the living entity's constitutional position, Swarupahaya, to be an eternal servant of Krishna. Krishnera Nityadas. Why? Because he is the marginal energy of Krishna. Krishnera Tatastha Shakti. And a manifestation simultaneously one and different from the Lord. Abheda Abheda Prakasha. Like a molecular particle or sunshine or fire. Suryamsha Kirana Yaiche Agni Jwala Chaya. Krishna has three varieties of energy. Swabhavika Krishnera Tina Prakara Shakti Hai. So what are these three varieties? Krishnera Swabhavika Tina Shakti Parinati, Chit Shakti, Jiva Shakti or Maya Shakti. Lord Krishna naturally has three energetic transformations, and these are known as spiritual potency, the living entity potency, and the illusory potency. So Chit Shakti, that is the spiritual potency, the Jiva Shakti, living entity potency, and the illusory potency. So this is how Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is answering Sanatana Goswami, that we are part and parcel of eternal servant of Krishna, Nityera Krishna Das, constitutional position to be eternal servant of Krishna, because he is a marginal energy of Krishna and a manifestation simultaneously one and different from the Lord. And there are also two analogies given. One is particle of sunshine or a particle of fire. So the two energies have been given, two examples have been given. And then there is a classification of three energies and how we are one of those three energies. So there is another further explanation that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gives as to the second question, why we are suffering like this. Krishna bhuli se jiva anadi bahirmukha ateva maya tare deya samsara dukha. Forgetting Krishna, the living entity has been attracted by the external feature from time immemorial. Therefore, the illusory energy Maya gives him all kinds of misery in his material existence. So forgetting Krishna, what happens? Living entity has become attracted by external feature of time. External feature, which means Maya, from time immemorial. So what happens? We become attracted by Maya. We engage in sense gratification. Yehi samsparshaja bhoga dukkhayonayo evate adi ante vanta kaunteya na teshu ramate buddhaha. So what happens when we start enjoying senses? Yehi samsparshaja bhoga dukkayonaya evate. So the same sense enjoyment that we believe is giving us pleasure actually becomes a source of misery. So the moment we forget Krishna, we start enjoying our senses. Because if we forget our identity as being Krishnera Nityadas, then what happens? Our identity as Mayera Nityadas starts, or current Das at least. So current we become Go Dasa instead of Goswami, and we become servants of our senses. And as we start satisfying our senses, immediately that gives Dukkhayonaya Evate. That becomes the origin of miseries. So this Maya gives him all kinds of miseries in his material existence. So what Krishna says in this, there's a very interesting part here that Krishna says about the identity. And I'll just quote this extra verse, this one more verse, where Krishna is talking about what happens with false identity. If you go with the false identity, what happens? So Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, 18th chapter, 58th verse, Mat chitta sarva durgani mat prasada tarishyati athachetvam ahankaran na shrosyasi vinankshasi. So Krishna says, if you become conscious of me, mat chittaha, sarva durgani, then you will overcome all difficulties, sarva durgani, all obstacles. And how you will overcome? Mat prasada tarishyasi. By my grace, you will pass over all the obstacles of conditional lives. But athachetvam ahankaran. But if you do not work in such consciousness, but act through false ego, false identity, that I am this body, I am Arjuna, I am this grandson of Bhishma, I am the disciple of Dronacharya, and all these people who are in front of me, they are my brothers, they are my in-laws. Like that, if you act through the bodily identity, then what happens? Not hearing me, you will be lost, completely lost. So here is the choice that we have. We have the choice of acting through false ego, identifying with matter, identifying with the body, and becoming lost. Suffering life after life, enjoying our senses, and that becoming the source of misery. Or we can identify with Krishna, identify as the eternal servant of Krishna, and attain to the Brahma-Bhutah stage. And the Brahma-Bhutah state, it is not that it is something esoterical that we cannot get. It is within grasp. Prabhupada has given us the way. But, this example that he has given of Ambarish Maharaj, let me just read that verse. Savai mana Krishna padara vindayo, vachamsi vaikuntha gunanu varnani, karau harer mandira marjanas dishu, shrutim chakara chuta satkathodaye, mukunda lingalaya darshane drishau, tadbhritya gatra sparshe anga sangamam, granam chatat pada saroja saurabhe, Srimad Tulasya Rasanam Tadarpite. So in this, there are two things that I would like to highlight. One is the first line itself, Savai Mana Krishna Padara Vindayo. Because this is the main part of today's verse, in engaging or fixing one's minds on the lotus feet of the Lord, fixing our mind on Krishna. So Maharaj Ambarish always used to do that. He was always engage his mind in meditating upon the lotus feet of the Lord. And while there is a further description of how he uses his words in describing the glories of the Lord, etc., there is another very important point further down, and I put that in bold here. And all his desires in serving the Lord, 24 hours a day. Indeed, Maharaj Ambarish never desired anything for his own sense gratification. This is a very important point, because this desire is a inherent ability within our spirit soul, and we have the freedom to desire in the way we want. And if unless we desire to please the Lord, there is no way to fix our mind in the lotus feet of the Lord. So desiring to please the Lord is a beginning stage of getting to the point of fixing our mind on the lotus feet of the Lord, or fixing our mind on the Lord. So if we don't choose to act in a way that satisfies the desires of the Lord, then we will never get to the point of being fixed in the Supreme Lord. So now, of course, we would not want to satisfy the desire of somebody that we don't even know or has no relationship with us. And therefore, we should have this desire to, first of all, understand our identity. Ke ami. So if we have this curiosity about ourselves, who am I, that will lead to the answer of who I am as a Nityera Krishna Das. And then begins our journey of attempting to constantly stay engaged in satisfying the desires of the Lord. Not in satisfying our desires, but in satisfying desires of the Lord. And there is one more verse in Bhagavad Gita, just before the verse that we read earlier, 18.50 as 18.57, that has one very important point in the purport, which I would like to highlight. So I'll just read the verse and then I'll read one or two points in the purport. So Krishna says, Chetasa sarva karmani mahi sanyasya matparaha buddhi yogam upashritya mat chitta satatam bhava. In all activities, just depend on me. Chetasa sarva karmani mahi sanyasya matparaha, and always work under my protection. Buddhi yogam upashritya, in such devotional service. Buddhi yogam is translated devotional service. Upashritya mat chitta satatam bhava, be fully conscious of me. So in this verse, Prabhupada gives a very important description of how one must stay in, one must constantly desire to please the Lord. Where is that? I think I closed that. Yes. So I'll just read a few lines from the purport here. When one acts in Krishna consciousness, he does not act as a master of the world. So just see how it is that we can stay in Krishna consciousness. How is it that we can work to please Krishna? There is one very important characteristic if you want to please somebody. If you want to please a person, you cannot be the master. You have to act as a servant. Then that person will be pleased. So just like a servant, one should act fully under the direction of the Supreme Lord. A servant has no individual independence. He acts only on the order of the master. A servant acting on behalf of the Supreme Master has no affection for profit and loss. We have already seen this. How a person in Krishna consciousness has no affection for profit and loss. He simply discharges his duty faithfully in terms of the order of the Lord. Now, one may argue that Arjuna was acting under the personal direction of Krishna, but what about us? How can we get personal direction from Krishna? But when Krishna is not present, how should one act? If one acts according to the direction of Krishna in this book, as well as under the guidance of representative of Krishna, then the result will be the same. The Sanskrit word mat paraha is very important in this verse. It indicates that one who has no goal in life, save and except acting in Krishna consciousness just to satisfy Krishna, and while working in that way, one should think of Krishna only. I have been appointed to discharge this particular duty for Krishna. While acting in such a way, one naturally has to think of Krishna. This is perfect Krishna consciousness. But now is a very important point. This is a point which I wanted to highlight. That while we are starting our journey, we have understood our identity, we have understood theoretically that we are Nityara Krishna Das, and we have started our journey of trying to please Krishna. But there is a pitfall that is possible. The pitfall is we may concoct in our mind what Krishna wants. Actually, we may do what we want, and we may say this is what Krishna wants. So Prabhupada is cautioning us. He says, one should, however, note that after doing something whimsically, he should not offer the result to the Supreme Lord. That sort of duty is not in the devotional service of Krishna consciousness. One should act according to the order of Krishna. This is a very important point. This is Prabhupada's purport. That order of Krishna comes through disciplic succession from the bona fide spiritual master. Therefore, the spiritual master's order should be taken as the prime duty of life. If one gets a bona fide spiritual master and acts according to his direction, then his perfection of life in Krishna consciousness is guaranteed. So Prabhupada is making this very important point of how we can, even after we understand our identity theoretically and we start executing devotional service, it's very easily possible to get misled in the Sahaja Marga, where somebody may say, oh, I'm just sitting at home, I'm chanting, or I'm sitting at home, I'm doing some worship, or any such concocted way or idea. But he says, no, don't do that. You must act as per the order of spiritual master. And what is the order of our spiritual master? Our spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, has given us a very simple order, very, very simple order, how we can progress in our journey of beginning to satisfy Krishna's desires. So he says, simply chant, helplessly calling out to Nama Prabhu, which is Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. And hear that very sound. And hearing that sound is appreciative remembrance of Nama Prabhu. So he has given us this formula of chanting 16 rounds in the morning, early morning, rising early, chanting 16 rounds with attention on the sound and with the intention to please the Lord. And then during the day, there are specific services that one can take up depending upon the availability of time. And gradually one can increase the duration of time that is spent in rendering physical service. Particularly, Prabhupada has placed a lot of importance on preaching work. To the extent that we understand Krishna consciousness, to the extent we understand the importance of identity, to the extent we understand the importance of satisfying desires of Krishna, we have to share this knowledge. We have to preach to the people and take this knowledge to others who are new to this and who are innocent, who are open-minded. This is exactly what Prabhupada wanted, and this is his order for us. The extent to which we are able to do this, to that extent we will advance in Krishna consciousness. And not by simply having our own concocted ideas of pleasing Krishna. Because we hear this a lot. A lot of people will say, oh, Krishna is our life and soul. See, we have got Laddu Gopal in our house, and there will be one Laddu Gopal Vigraha will be there. And they will also follow various vratas. But then, since they are not acting under the order of spiritual master, the order of pure devotee, they actually don't know what Krishna wants. So they are making some attempt, but the attempt is going waste. It is going improperly. Very, very slow progress will happen. Because some desire is there to please Krishna. Krishna might, if they are sincere, Krishna might bring them in touch with the pure devotee if they are fortunate. But if we don't take it up, if we think that why should I listen to somebody? Why should I listen to the sannyasi here? Why I should listen to? I know from generations we have been worshipping Krishna. We are Krishna bhaktas from generations. We have such a attitude, then we will not be able to make any progress, and our whole life will be lost. So there is a process of chanting, a way to chant the 16 rounds that has been given. Due to lack of time, I won't go more into detail of that, but I'll just show you a brief one snapshot summary of this. How by the different feelings that one can develop in order to develop the attitude of servant. And in fact, if you go through this process and the slides that have been made available, or if you want, you can ask and it can be made available. Those slides, when you keep in front of you and chant, actually by reading the words which are there in the slides while you're chanting, it converts those thoughts that come as a result of reading those words into feelings. And those feelings, in fact, many of them are relevant even to the words that we studied today. How one can be joyful, how to reach the state of joyfulness. Joyfulness is obtained by trying to please Krishna. So there's a slide that says, my joy is in the joy of being enjoyed by you. I have no other joy. I don't want to enjoy the senses for myself, but rather my joy, the entire world, Krishna, this entire cosmic manifestation exists for the pleasure of the whole, for the pleasure of the absolute truth, including Krishna and all his part and parcels. And my joy in this is because actually the world is created for Krishna's pleasure. So what is my pleasure then? My pleasure is in being enjoyed by Krishna. My pleasure is in the pleasure of the Supreme Lord. So that is how one gets to be joyous. And similarly, the other part about how sama sarveshu bhuteshu, or before that, no hankering, na shochati na kankshati, na shochati. Why do we lament? Often we lament if there is some distress in our life, some difficulty, some obstacle that we face. It seems unsurmountable. But there is a particular slide in this PowerPoint that says that even if I get some difficulties in my life, some obstacles, some challenges, calamities because of my past bad karma, then because I am fixed in my devotional service to you, actually it becomes an opportunity for me to increase my attachment to your holy name. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. This Mahamantra can be more feelingly chanted by somebody who is in trouble, because actually the Krishna is our protector, Rama Prabhu is our protector. So when these difficulties come, it increases our utter dependence on Nama Prabhu. Similarly, hankering. If our goal is to please Krishna, then where is the question of asking for anything for ourselves? That does not even occur. And about the sama sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim labate param. There is a slide in this for humility, and the way to develop the humility, as we develop humility rather, one of the attitude that we have is that all the living entities are part and parcel of the Lord. They are also spiritual in nature, and they are also part of the absolute whole. And when we see them, we just saw that how there's equal vision for all of them. And this attitude should be present, and that's a must, that's a necessity for humility. If we are thinking that I'm superior to somebody else, then humility will not develop. So having this vision of everyone being part and parcel of Krishna is a very important aspect of humility. Not criticizing others unnecessarily, fault finding. These are all habitual offenses that we commit against others, thinking that I can do something better than that person. So all these concepts are covered in these slides. And not but last the least, the part about Mad Bhaktim Labate Param, that is about the complete and total surrender to the Lord. And there are also multiple slides for that, which you can go through. So essentially, all the points that are covered today, and in fact, any other Gita verse that you take and you start reading, you will find that they are covered in these PowerPoints. So my humble request to everyone who's looking at this, attending the session today, please try to seek out information about this PowerPoint presentation that has to be used while you're chanting. So first of all, please find time to chant 16 rounds of Hare Krishna Mahamantra early in the morning, and using this PowerPoint in front of you, it will change the way you look at chanting. It will change the way your quality of chanting, that is assured. And all of this starts with curiosity about the self. Why should I do this chanting? Who am I? Why do I exist? So if these items of curiosity are not there in our heart, if these we are not curious to find out, none of this will make sense. So with this, I'll just stop here and see if you have any questions, comments.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
While explaining the words of the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 18.57, Chedasa Sarva. Yes, Prabhu. So you have explained about the pitfalls, Prabhu. Like sometimes we are thinking sometimes we have started to think our own way. So can you please explain again, Prabhu?
Thinking our own way means having preconceived notion of acting actually as per sense gratification, and then saying I'm doing it for Krishna. Because there is another verse also, right? Yat karoshi yat juhoshi tat karosi madarpanam. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you do, give it as offering to me. So when initially somebody reads Bhagavad Gita, they'll think, oh, whatever I do, I should be offering to Krishna. All right, let me smoke cigarette, and the pleasure I'll give to Krishna. Let me have some beer, I'll give the pleasure to Krishna. Whatever I want, I will do. I will say this is for Krishna, I'll keep doing whatever I want. I gave a crude example, but like this, there are finer examples also. This actually acts in a very, very fine way, even in a sadhaka's life. We all have this, because our addiction to senses are so strong that our mind starts giving all kinds of justifications on why that is the right thing to do. It justifies. The other day, Prabhu had taken a class on how the mind influences us. And one of the things it does is it gives justification why this is the right thing to do. And one of the justifications, it knows, oh, you have come to Krishna consciousness, right? It knows that. So it says, oh, Krishna wants this. Krishna wants this only. This is what Krishna wanted. So it is happening. Like that, it justifies. So that's why it's very important that we should voluntarily yield to another person, to a superior authority, and who has received their authority from Krishna in disciplic succession, even on small matters. Any other questions, comments? If not, we'll stop here. So all of you, please come on the camera and repeat after me. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna,
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna,
Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare,
Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare,
Hare Rama, Hare Rama,
Hare Rama, Hare Rama,
Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भगवद गीता की, जगत गुरु शिला प्रभुपाद की, ताई गौर प्रेमानंदे। हरे कृष्ण। हरे कृष्ण माता जी, अंचिता माता जी।
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Where is your daughter?
Yeah, she's here.
Hare Krishna.
Say Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.